Welcome to another episode of 2B1. My name is Levi.
And I'm Diana. And thank you guys for joining us on day 8 to 10 years. And today we're going to be talking about our premarital counseling journey.
Yes.
So little fun fact, we did our premarital counseling before we got engaged, which is not traditional. Most people get engaged and then do their premarital counseling in some time form of their engagement before they get married. But we, under Pastor James, he believes that you should do some premarital counseling before you take that big financial step of buying an engagement ring, and make sure that your decision is smart, that you guys are in alignment, and that this is the next step that you really want to take. And I think for us, it was really important for us to really follow that counsel because of the different perspectives that we had on marriage.
Yes.
So from my side, I didn't really think of marriage as a big deal. And to be honest, probably when we were dating, marriage wasn't even something that I thought about. Mostly because growing up, I didn't really see anyone get married. Didn't live in a household where there was a marriage. While there was marriage in my family, I never really interacted with a married couple per se. A lot of the people in my family just kind of cohabitated, lived together, had like what we call as common law marriage, meaning they lived together for an extended period of time. So they were known to be husband and wife by the community, but not recognized legally as in a marriage. And so I think that formulated some of my thought process that, you know, marriage is just, I used to say, just a piece of paper that two people sign. It's not a big deal. Like, it wasn't a big thing to me. And I think, did we do premarital counseling after our 2 years of dating, or it was before? Before. So I think as we were getting...
August 2013 would have been 2 years.
Yeah, and we got engaged
in September.
But
we did premarital counseling in June.
Yeah, that summer. Yeah. So before the 2 year mark. But I think we had conversations about that, and you shared how important marriage is to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You want to speak a little bit of why?
Yeah, well, so I'm like the opposite of Diana. Like, I grew up and almost everyone around me was married if they were living together, right? So I had my parents, grew up in a 2-parent household, but she did too. But for me, it was my parents were married. Like, I had the wedding photo albums and the crazy hair that they had and stuff. The stuff looking with the video, my uncle dancing crazy in the video, going crazy, and, you know, what would probably be like considered aunties at that time because they're like good friends with my mom, or whatever. Like, all them in '88, my parents got married on June 4th, 1988, which is about a year and a month before I was born. So we know what they was doing. But we don't go into that. But we already know like what time it was because I came literally a year and like maybe a year. It's basically a year and a month from that date. So, you know, I had it different. I had that. I had my Uncle Dwayne and my Marla. I had Pastor and Pastor Chris. I had Pastor Stacy and Miss Karen.
Yeah, you had a lot of examples.
I had so many examples. I had Pastor Mike and Miss Carla. I had, you know, so many examples of people in my life. And then, you know, that's from like being a baby. All those people knew me when I was a baby.
And all your uncles at some point were married, right?
All my uncles married, right? Marriage was just all around me. So it was almost like people look at college. Marriage was like an inevitable step that I was going to take. That's just what it was. So that's for funny. Me, because I knew I would get married, and I always thought I would be one of those guys that got married at like
young, right?
Late teens, early 20s. So like 19 to like 22
You was
max.
trying to get married in high school.
I was a lover boy. You know what I'm saying? Drake got that album, Certified Lover Boy. That was me. Like, I knew I was one of those dudes that was just different. Like most guys in their teens and their early 20s, what are they doing? They're sowing their wild oats.
Mm-hmm.
I won't say that I didn't participate in that kind of thinking, but in the forefront of my mind was always like, well, that ain't the life. The life is like to find you one and like build, grow together. They know you, you trust them. Like I always had that, and I was like, and I want to make sure, and I thought differently. I felt like I was a little bit ahead of my time compared to my peers because I was also, this is the stuff you get when you have a dad in the house who married your mom, talk to you about things like benefits and insurance, life insurance and stuff like that, and how, you don't want to have your, the person you're with, your significant other, out here in a bind because you're not married and they don't have access to all of the things that they need access to in any situation. It doesn't have to be death. It could be severe injury where I'm incapacitated and I can't, do things for myself, and I need the person I'm with to be able to access all of my information and go get what they need to get so that they can help me out. So I always just had that way of thinking. I said I want somebody who I know is for me. And I know some of you are going to watch this. You have a negative view on relationships right now because it seems to be very tough right now. And I understand it can be discouraging. The relationships you get on these dating apps and this hookup culture and all that kind of stuff. And I get it. But
it's rough out there for the singles.
I know. And then sometimes you find somebody who you think is right and they present as right and it doesn't turn out the way you thought it was going to turn out. And due to no fault of yours, in a sense of like you didn't do anything to breach the relationship, but it just kind of dissolves and you thought that was going to be the one. So I understand it's very difficult out here and I want to acknowledge that. But I always had a firm belief that no matter what, I had my time in my high school years, of just operating in a way that just wasn't me, being a player, doing things like that, being a heartbreaker. But ultimately, I knew who I was, and why it didn't work out is because if you're going to be a real player, you have to be emotionally detached. I attached to every young lady I was interacting with.
Shout out to the Cancers of the world.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy. But that's because I was never meant to be a player. I was always meant to follow that thing that was a desire in my heart and my mind, which was to actually be with somebody and to create.
Right. So you had that craving to be in a long-term committed relationship.
Yes.
Which is what led for us to have premarital counseling before we hit the 2-year mark, because he was having those conversations. And I'm like, sir, that ain't really where my mind is. Like, I'm really not, like, we could be together. We can look for a place together, like that kind of stuff. But I can't say that I want to get married. And if that's what you want to do, then I don't know. Like, should we stay in this relationship? So honestly, premarital counseling for us was also like kind of relationship or couples counseling, because it was kind of also helping us figure out, like, are we staying in this relationship and heading towards marriage, or do we have to separate from each other because your wants and my wants weren't aligning at the time?
Right. That was a real thing. That was a conversation we actually had. I think I handled it pretty skillfully. It was a very tough conversation for me because I really, really was in love with you at that time, and I'm still in love with you now, but I'm speaking of past tense. I was in love with you so much that I was like, I don't want her to say she wants to get married because she doesn't want to separate. But I also don't want to separate. Right. But
the crazy part is that, and like, correct me if I'm wrong, but remembering, I feel like I kind of initiated the hard conversation. Like, I think you presented the idea of premarital counseling.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, but at the end of this, like, we're either heading towards getting engaged and married, or we're breaking up.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking about a conversation I might have had with you maybe after it might have been like a little after we celebrated a year, and I was like, where is this heading? Before we even thought about premarital counseling.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like, I think I said, what is your stance on marriage now? And then you were still kind of in the same space. You were kind of like, I think what we got going on is good, and I don't see why we need to get married.
Why we got to mess it up?
Like, what is, like, what we have is good. Like, so I guess your thinking was like, because at that point, we celebrating a year. You had graduated. Mm-hmm. I was back at Delaware County Community College, and we had just celebrated a year, and I'm like, listen, I'm enjoying the ride. If we would have equated to a ride,
right?
I'm enjoying the ride, but I also know that my ethic is that this needs to eventually transition into marriage.
I think too, around that time, is that when you got ordained as a deacon? Like, I don't remember what year was that.
That was 2013. So that was right before we did premarital. That was like in the
right. So I think that too also played a part in it too. Like you now are serving the Lord in a different capacity, and so it was like you gotta do right. You can't just
I can't.
So I think that also stemmed, not saying that it was pressure or anything like that, but I think that also stemmed the seriousness of the conversation.
Yeah.
And also stemmed like, what are we doing with this relationship? Let's have some counseling with Pastor James and Pastor Chris.
Yeah.
And so that summer leading into
probably, I think it was
2 years of dating.
2 weeks of May, and then all of June.
Yeah, something like that.
I don't know if we had to do I don't think we had to do 6 sessions, did we?
I think we did do 6 sessions, but this maybe the last one was like a little.
You brought food.
Yeah, it was just we
have the
pat on the back.
Yeah, we have the standing stamp of approval as one of the top tier. I don't want to get Pastor Chris and Pastor in trouble.
Don't be getting them in trouble.
We kind of have like the standing approval to be like the standard bearers, but that's all right though. Everybody else is doing good too. But I just want to let y'all know that.
Yeah, people following suit now.
Yeah. You got to do it. You got to do it. So for me, it was important to do it. I think it was enlightening because no matter what, people, I think where I come from, and then people who maybe don't even come from where I come from, can look at like how I grew up and think it's like perfect. Kind of like we looked at the Huxtables, kind of like how we looked at like my wife and kids, the Kyles on there, and all the families, and particularly families of color, that we see where mother and father are married and and everything's in the house. No matter what's going on, they could be arguing, they could be whatever, but they're together. They figure it out. They work through everything.
Right.
They're funny. They're all that. And so I think people from the outside looking in looked at my upbringing that way. But even if you feel that way about that, I still needed a fresh perspective on, and that's a shameless plug.
Shameless.
I still needed a fresh perspective on marriage and what it was, what it isn't, and on top of that, what our marriage would be.
Right.
That's the real key right there.
That is the key.
Anybody who's going to lead you through premarital counseling is not going to make it seem like it's like a generic thing, or you need
or
to
it shouldn't, or it shouldn't be. And if it is feeling like that, then maybe you need to look for a different source of premarital counseling, because it should be very tailor specific to your relationship, because everybody's relationship is different. And so some of the things we went over in premarital counseling were childhood traumas and our upbringing. That one took me out. I was on the brown couch, slayed in tears.
Those who know the brown couch.
Those who know, yes. But it was helpful because I think it opened the door and it provided a safe space that even though we were dating for a year and a half, close to 2 years, I hadn't let you into those spaces yet. Right. Not fully. Like, it's kind of like you could see through the bottom of the door crack, but I hadn't opened that door yet. And I think at premarital counseling, pastor wasn't going to let me go because he made a valid point. Like, you're going to bring all those traumas and all those experiences from your life are going to trickle in and are going to show up in your marriage. Like, they might have not been showing up right now while you're dating because everything is cute and everything is ha ha he he lovey dovey. You're on rainbows and butterflies and all that other lovey-dovey stuff, but when it gets down to it and it's just you two, that stuff is gonna pop up. And so it was great to start opening that door and letting you into that space that I never let anyone else into. So we talked about that, childhood traumas, upbringing, even our religious or spiritual upbringing. So I grew up Catholic, and
Good
then
Catholic girl.
I was a good Catholic girl. I did all. I went to Sunday school. I went to CCD class. I served. Worked at the church rectory. Gave people their holy water.
Got to be good if you're giving out the holy water.
Got to be good. You cannot be touching holy water with sinful hands. But we talked about all of that and what we wanted our future to look like. We talked about how many kids we wanted, what we wanted their lives to be like.
Boy, how all that's changed. I think I said like 10.
Crazy. I never agreed to that. Never.
And I don't know who that man was.
We might be done that too.
I don't know who that man was.
But we talked about that. We talked about goals, like just in general. We talked about budgeting and financing, which was a good eye-opener, determining who was better with the numbers. Not who was bringing in the most money or who eventually would bring in the most money, but who had the better mind and hand at handling and balancing the budget. What else did we talk about?
We talked about so many things. There was literally no stone unturned.
Truly.
And
we talked about sex.
Yeah, that's real.
That was the brown couch turned to a red couch that day. I was like, what? Yeah. I don't think I anticipated that conversation.
Yeah.
I think in my mind, I was like, oh, this is a church setting. We're going to talk about relationship and family.
It was important, though, because
it was important.
He made us understand that we have to communicate intentionally around that, too. Like, we can't just leave it to, like, passions, and then also based on our history that predates our relationship, there may be some things that are happening or not happening because of that. And so the key was to have a conversation about it so that there was understanding on both sides of that. And I think it's important that if you're out there and you're looking at doing premarital counseling, please don't let whoever's leading y'all in that,
don't shy away. Over that. Yeah, don't shy away from that conversation.
If they don't have that on the agenda, put that on there because that's a safe space. And really, we can trust Pastor James and Pastor Chris, which this is a conversation. It wasn't lewd. It wasn't a lewd conversation. Yeah. It was a real conversation. And it's important to have that conversation because there are no-nos and there are must-dos.
Right.
And each person has their own. And so you have to have the conversation and give understanding so that it's not just if it's a no, it's just not a no for because I said so, which is okay too. I'm not against that. That you're allowed to say no without reason. In that arena, I'm not advocating saying that you have to explain everything. But what I will say is, it helps to have the conversation and communicate, and then have some comprehension of, oh, there's a reason why this is a boundary.
Yeah.
There's a reason why. And so we're having that conversation. So don't mistake what I'm saying. I'm not saying that in the moment, if you say no, that there has to be this dissertation you give to the person you're saying no to about the particular thing you're saying no
thesis.
About. Yeah, you don't have to do that. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, in a premarital counseling situation, when there isn't the act of sex getting ready to happen, you're just having a conversation around the topic of and the potential acts of sex that will happen in your marriage, of what's a a yes or a no? What's
Right.
something that you feel like must be a part of the situations or the encounters, the intimacy, or shouldn't be,
Right.
and things like that. So
Because I think a lot of people just assume that, like, oh, because you're engaging in sex as a couple, that you know everything, but not until you have that like conversation do you get into more depths about, like you said, your do's and your no-nos.
Right.
So it was important, and just given our history, like my history of sexual abuse and that kind of trauma, like we didn't really talk about that when we were dating, but that was like a safe space because we had already kind of engaged that topic in one of our other sessions. It was like, okay, this is safe to talk about, like what kind of pushes me, what doesn't. And at that time I was still kind of learning, and still till this day pretty much learning, like you know, my boundaries and stuff like that, or what are some triggers or whatever.
And it makes me gracious. What I will say, and not to be, like I said, it's not about being lewd or anything, but what I will say in that department, I don't think we struggle. I think there's ebbs and flows when it comes to that. For both of us, though, I think as men, we think that we're supposed to be on go all the time. Like, get off work and we're ready to go. Come back from the gym and we're ready to go. Like, we're supposed to always be in the mood to do something. There's times where I'm not in the mood and she might be in the mood, or vice versa. I think we're more like a condition to believe like women are the ones who do the in and out of moods thing. It's like, no, men do too. And if we're honest with ourselves, we'll know that we don't always want to have sex, and that's fine. And we even talked about that kind of thing. And some of that is attached to childhood traumas and hurts and wounds, and it could be in relationships, so maybe not necessarily a trauma, but just like a wound of like feeling it maybe in a relationship. Oh, all the like my previous relationships were all based on physical, attraction and lust, and I don't want to feel like that, and so there's just times where you might not be in the mood, and that's okay. Just because you're married, I think some men have the idea that we're married and you should just be willing to give me what I want sexually whenever I want it. And I think sometimes even in the church, there's this idea like, don't send your man out there uncovered. And it's like, well, at some point, men, we got to take responsibility for ourselves. So it shouldn't be that's an act of coercion if I have to say to you, don't make me go out here uncovered, because I'm almost basically telling her, if you leave me uncovered, I'm gonna go sleep with somebody else, and that's not right. So there's a space where that conversation helps you have grace and be like, you know what, she's not gonna always be in the mood. Yeah. But guess what? I'm not gonna always be in the mood when she's in the mood. There's gonna be seasons where we're out of whack. There's gonna be seasons where we're out of whack. There's gonna be seasons where the things that she wants don't align with the things I want as far as physical intimacy goes, right? And how do we navigate that? And vice versa. So,
and on that same topic, one of the other things, we talked a lot about that topic, hot topic. Yeah. No, but we also talked about like our love languages and how we express love and how we receive love. So that kind of gave us a clearer picture of where we were. What else did we talk about?
That was
pretty much the synopsis of it.
And then the calling. That's the last thing we can.
Yeah.
Do you feel called? Because we get caught up in this film idea of romance, which is like, I see you, I fall in love with you, we have great passionate sex, and we're destined to be together forever because, oh my goodness, I'm just so in love. But honestly, that doesn't take you anywhere. And we really dove into that in premarital counseling. It's really about, do you feel called to one another? Because a lot of stuff that predated me in her life is heavy stuff. And that's stuff that as her husband, I have to be the repairer of the breach. And so there's a place where she has to do most of the work, of course. But as a man, and her man specifically, I have to be the one that is willing to stand. And being a repairer of the breach isn't always easy, because sometimes, because I'm the safest person in her life, I get the brunt of all the feels. All of them. And so And I'm okay with that because I know I'm called to her. I believe that I'm called to her, and I still do. So I'll take that. And then vice versa. All the stuff that I have, all my insecurities, all my stuff, she gets the brunt of that.
Right.
I snap out and she's like, whoa, I wasn't saying that. And I'm like, oh, okay. But she's getting it because I'm so tense sometimes and feeling like, there's times where I don't feel seen, not by her, but in general, I feel like I'm not where I could be, where I feel like I'm qualified to be all the time. I'll feel that way, and she gets the brunt of that. So it's like a vice versa thing where you have to feel called because, and especially now in our microwave society, people will just walk away from relationships. So marriage, I don't have to put up with that. Right. You kind of do. You signed up for it. Now, as long as it's not abuse, I'm not talking about abuse, and we don't abuse each other. But there's times where the person who's the safest person for you, that loves you, whether you're your best or your worst.
Yeah.
Because for better or for worse. So whether you're going to give it to them, and we had to talk about those things. And so we navigate them things well now. Even if we get in our feelings initially, we come out of them pretty quickly and we move. But that all stemmed from premarital counseling with Pastor Paul James and Pastor Christine.
And I think what you said about calling was the turning point for me. Like when we had that conversation about being called and marriage being a calling and our relationship being a calling and feeling called to one another, that was definitely the turning point for me in my thought frame about marriage.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, if I feel called to him and I feel like he is my safe space, he is sent to God for me to, be better and grow and all these kind of things, then maybe marriage isn't just a piece of paper. Maybe it's not just two signatures being confirmed by the law, but it's something greater than that. It's a commitment and a calling to one another, and that really helped turn my mind and change my mind. And so by the end of the 6 weeks, when Pastor James and Pastor Chris were like, we think you guys are good, and we kind of sign off, give the okay that you two are fit for marriage and have, common ground and feel compatible and in a good space to take that next step, I was in agreement with it. And so we had conversations about getting engaged soon after, and
the rest you'll see on 7 Days Till. Thank you for tuning in to 2B1. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe.
See you tomorrow.